The Canon EOS R came out just around 5 years ago, almost to the day actually, and it was a pretty big deal. New mirrorless system from Canon replacing the DSLRs, kind of moving forward with technology, and the EOS R was the first camera that they brought out with the new RF mount, which of course now there's a whole range of cameras going from kind of, more entry-level stuff right up to super professional stuff with the R5 and the R3. But the EOS R is what started it all. But the question is, how does this hold up in 2023? How does it hold up 5 years later? Is it still worth looking at as a camera? Let's talk about it. So I've been playing around with this for the last couple of weeks. I've been out taking some photos, shooting some video, doing different kinds of stuff. The number one takeaway immediately using this camera is this is a beautiful sensor. The colors are outstanding. The low light performance, which I remember from the launch actually, is it's extraordinary actually. It's very, very good. And you can get some extremely beautiful images using this camera. That's no surprise really, because you're still talking about a 33 megapixel sensor. So you've got quite a lot of detail there to play with. It's not dissimilar to something like a 5D Mark IV, but obviously mirrorless, but just with such better low light handling. You can really bump this ISO up to 6400 without really thinking about it at all, and then up from there still and get some really, really perfectly fine images in terms of noise. And 33 megapixels still gives you lots of room to crop if you want to as well. I crop routinely on a 24 megapixel camera, so 33, there's lots of room there to do that. This camera also came with the dual pixel autofocus, which does work really well. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, the autofocus is not as good as a camera that comes out now. So something like the R5 or the R3, where it is just ridiculous. But it still holds up absolutely fine. For a camera that's 5 years old, autofocus was in a place at that point where it was very, very good. So you've still got things like eye autofocus, which works extremely well if you're taking portraits, if you want to shoot landscape, if you want to shoot street photography, really anything like that. It's going to hold up extremely well. It can also shoot 8 frames a second, which, while not the fastest in the world, is really not bad at all. 8 frames a second really still allows you to capture all kinds of things when it comes to wildlife or sports or something like that. It's not as fast as some cameras, including something like the R3, if you want to go down that route. But then you wouldn't really expect it to be. Build-wise as well, I love the feeling of this camera. It feels like a modern camera, absolutely, both in terms of the way it controls, the menus, and actually the way it feels. It's got that really nice kind of mirrorless camera feel to it, where it's pretty small, it's pretty light, but it's still chunky enough to feel really good in the hands. The grip is really nice, it's very comfortable. There are a couple of things that I wish it had. I wish it had a dedicated joystick. I always just like that on a camera, and it doesn't have that. It does have a flip out screen, which I really liked. I know at the time some people were not so keen on it. I think it's very handy for the kinds of shots you might want to get, and I find myself using that all the time. But the actual EVF looks really good as well. It does also have this touch bar on the back, which is kind of a love it or hate it thing, I think. A lot of people don't like this as much, and you don't see it on cameras like the R5. It hasn't really been carried over in that sense, but I don't mind it. I mapped ISO to it, so you can map different things to it. It's relatively customizable. I mapped ISO to it so I could just scroll my thumb left or right to increase or decrease the ISO that I was using. That worked really well. That was a really handy way to use this camera, and I found myself very instinctively starting to do that actually. I also really like the screen on the top, which at a glance gives you, first of all, the mode you're in, but also your various settings as well. Also worth mentioning, the battery life is really good. It seemed to last an extremely long time. I kind of assumed I'd have to change the battery or come back and charge it, but it never ran out actually, even though I went out on a few different shoots with it, just on one charge. So the battery life is definitely worth mentioning as well. Now, one area that was not particularly popular when this camera launched was the fact that it only has the one card slot. It depends how you want to use this camera, right? For me, that doesn't really matter too much, but if I was shooting a wedding, if I was shooting an event where I couldn't redo it, there was no option, and I wanted to be able to back it up, then I probably would use a different camera which has 2 card slots. Otherwise, for the most part, I'm just using one card anyway. So this is a personal preference thing. If that matters to you, then that is obviously a big deal. If it doesn't, if you're a bit like me, it doesn't really matter too much, then you're probably not going to worry too much, but that is something to just be aware of. That said though, it's not the first and it won't be the last camera to have just the one card slot. So photography wise, I think this is genuinely still, it's up there as a very, very good camera. The color science is absolutely fantastic. It's the beautiful images and you can get a lot of really, really good photographs, kind of no matter really what genre you're shooting. Video was an area where this camera maybe could have been just a little bit better. Now, again, it depends a little bit on how you're shooting. I think as a video system, there are just better cameras out there and better cameras out there that you could get used. If you're looking at this used, you could probably get a different camera used if it's video that you're specifically wanting to go for. That said, it can shoot 4K up to 30 frames a second. There is a crop in all the 4K modes. And to give you an actual idea of what that looks like, I'm shooting just a little bit zoomed in from 24mm, so it's around 24mm right now. This is full frame, shot in 4K, but I'll punch in now to a 1.5 times crop. This is how close it would be, even around 24mm with that 1.5 times crop. So you can see it is closer, and you know, it's not ideal really. Where it is good though, is where you want to get more reach out of your lenses. And I've actually used crops before for that exact thing. So sometimes it can be a little bit of an advantage, but certainly worth being aware of. Otherwise, you can shoot 1080p up to 60 frames a second. And then if you want to shoot 120 frames a second to get that kind of super slow-mo, you're going to have to do that at 720p. Now, I will admit, it's not the end of the world. The 1080p footage is actually quite high bitrate, so the quality of that video is actually really good. And 60 frames a second still allows you to get some slow motion, which is nice. But 720p to get 120 frames a second is probably not ideal. And those specs are really where this camera is probably showing its age a little bit more. If you're looking at this as a video system, there are probably better alternatives you can go for. But if you're looking at it as a photography system, I think this is fantastic. There are so many options now for the RF lenses as well. That mount has really seen just a huge amount of lenses come out over the last 5 years. So at the time when this launched, there were a few lenses, absolutely, but you know, as a new mount, it was just getting started. Whereas now there are so many, including in our used department, where you can go and check out a bunch of different lenses. So if you wanted to look at a camera like this, absolutely you could look at all kinds of lenses. You've got just an absolute world of choice now for that kind of thing. So to really sum this up, does the Canon EOS R hold up in 2023? Well, the answer is absolutely yes. This feels like a modern camera. And in terms of photography, this feels like a very capable camera. I mean, I'm still impressed by its low light performance. I think the images are beautiful and the colors are beautiful. The autofocus works really well, actually. I love the feel of it. I love the build of it. It's a lovely, lovely camera, especially to go out and shoot photos. If you're looking at it primarily as a video system, I think you could probably do better with a different Canon camera or a different system around this kind of price point within that used kind of spectrum of cameras. But like I say, as a photography camera, I have really genuinely enjoyed using this camera a lot. I've not used it, I don't think, since probably something like 2019, something like that, maybe even all the way back to 2018. But really, really definitely recommend this as a photography camera. Now you can check out this camera along with a whole bunch of other cameras and lenses in our used department, which I'll put a link to down in the description. It's a great way of getting good kit, good equipment, but at a lower price. So make sure to go and check it out. Of course, you could have a look at something like the Canon EOS R, but we've got loads of stuff there as well to go and check out. Otherwise, don't forget to like and subscribe. We've got new content all the time. I will see you in the next video. But until then, as always, thanks for watching.